Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first lecture video in the coronavirus times of life. We're going to get into the lecture on Paul's letters, intro to his letters. This should be, for fourth period, a lecture that you receive Monday afternoon, and for fifth and sixth period, you should receive it Tuesday afternoon. Hopefully, you're logged into your individual class Google Classrooms. I'll post it to the general Google Classroom that we had for New Testament for third quarter. But if you're only on that one, jump into accepting the specific request for your periods Google Classroom. If that was confusing, we can talk on Zoom. Who was Paul? What letters did he write, and to whom? Why did he write? And how does the genre epistle affect interpretation? These are going to be the four questions we're asking today, and I'm going to put them on the board individually and then answer them. Who was Paul? So the question is, who was Paul? And it is a question that requires more than just a simple answer, because there's multiple things about him that are going to be important for understanding the theology about what he writes and the issues that he deals with in his letters, and what it means for us today is important for understanding who he is. And so there's four things that I want you to know. And the first one is that Paul was not always Paul, that he was formerly Saul. And while he was Saul, he was a Pharisee and a persecutor of the Christian church. And church. So this line might be confusing. He was not a Pharisee of the church. He was a Pharisee and a persecutor of the church while he was a Pharisee. So he would go around and he would kill and threaten Christians. And you can see this in Acts, as well as he mentions it in plenty of his letters. And then the second thing is he was confronted by Christ. And so that caused him, confronted by Christ on the road to Damascus, and this caused him to become an apostle and a missionary to the Gentiles. So he became an apostle and a missionary to Gentiles. And I'm going to camp out here for just a minute here. Missionary to Gentiles. So Paul was a Pharisee, and this was kind of his leadership in the Jewish realm of his life, where he cared a lot about the law, about following the law. He thought he could follow the law. That's how you would receive eternal life, essentially, in favor with God. And because of this, he persecuted the church because they preached a different way of honoring God. And then when he was confronted by Christ, he basically, that confrontation, him seeing Christ physically, allowed him to be called an apostle. Did I even spell that right? I think apostle. And what an apostle is basically an authoritative figure in the early church who witnessed Christ, who was with Christ, and not only were with Christ, because Mary, the mother of Jesus, she was also with Christ, but has been approved and actually chosen to be a leader of the early church, to basically be the foundation and the start of the church. They are given that authority to start the church. And so he's going to be considered with this group. There's 11 apostles who were considered Jesus' disciples, specific to Christ's ministry. But not only are they now disciples, now they become apostles, which is a term basically a starter of the church. And then he's also a missionary to specifically Gentiles. In each town, he would go to the Jewish synagogue first, but sometimes the Jews would not accept his message. And so he would go to the Gentiles after that. And actually, that was his primary emphasis compared to other church apostles or church leaders who were focused mainly on Jewish communities, maybe in Jerusalem. He was out traveling around in Greece and modern day Turkey in Asia Minor, primarily being a missionary to Gentiles. And then one other thing that Paul is, that he did was basically he had 3 missionary journeys. I am just going to write 3 mission trips for short. That's not typically how they're discussed. They're talked about as missionary journeys. There's a little Bible Project video, like a 30-second clip from the Acts video that I might have you watch. It explains them further, and you'll have to take notes on that as well. But essentially, there is 3 trips, and then a lot of people consider his 4th trip to Rome while he's on trial, basically as a missionary journey as well. So that's Paul. Now we're going to talk about why he wrote and what he wrote. So his life is primarily talked about in the book of Acts, but it doesn't describe, at least robustly, the words of Paul. He does say a lot in Acts, but mostly what we get is his letters. Okay, so that's going to be the primary thing that he writes, and that shows up in our New Testament. So, what did Paul write, and to whom? To who? To whom? Wow. Sorry, I'm not as efficient as I'd like to be, but we're all kind of figuring out this distance learning together. Okay, what did Paul write and to whom? This is the second question that we're going to be answering, and there's going to be the first answer. What did Paul write? He wrote letters. You'll also hear me use this term, epistles. You guys have heard this already. This is typically how they're referred to when talking about the letters that are written in the New Testament. The word epistles, but really it's just a letter. And so you're essentially reading someone's mail. You're reading Paul's mail to either a church or a person, and that brings us to whom? He's going to write 9 letters to churches, and then he's going to write 3 to pastors. And then you might say, Mr. Swigert, there's 13 letters. What's the other group? He writes 9 to churches, 3 to pastors. That's only 12. He's going to write 1 more to Philemon, who's not a pastor and he's not a church. It's to an individual, and we'll discuss that later. But these are the 2 main categories that you need to know that are the audience of his letters. There's 9 churches that Paul writes to that we have in the New Testament, and 3 letters to pastors. Sorry, not 9 churches, 9 letters to various churches, maybe 6 churches, because there's Thessalonians and Corinthians, that is twice, maybe 7 letters, I don't know, or churches. And then our next question is, why did he write? And so we're just going to get rid of this guy here. You guys can pause if you need to. Why did Paul write? So why did he write letters in the first place? And it's going to be two simple reasons. Okay, they're going to be different things. Okay, the first one is to correct, and he's going to be correcting a lot of things within these churches or to these individuals. He's either going to be correcting something that they believe, a doctrine that is wrong. He's going to correct wrong doctrine, or he's going to correct wrong behavior. But he's writing many times to correct something that's going on in a church or by an individual. And then he's also going to encourage. There's some letters that he writes where he doesn't really have much to say that is corrective. He's going to write to encourage those churches to have them continue on doing what they're doing and continue on believing what they're believing. Now, in most letters, he's going to do both of these. In most letters, he's going to have both of these. In some of them, he's going to have more correction. Some of them, he's going to have more encouragement. In Corinthians, we're going to see a lot of correction. And he's not going to spend as much time encouraging, although he will encourage every once in a while. So this answers the question: why did Paul write his letters? And then the last question we're going to be discussing is: how does the genre epistle, or how does the genre letter, affect interpretation? So we'll throw up epistle right here. How does it affect interpretation? Because we're going to be going through looking at various doctrines and passages that are in these epistles, and we should know, okay, how does it being an epistle affect how we what it means, affect what it means? And there's going to be three ways that it's done here. That that the audience is going to dictate the issues that are discussed. Discussed issues, or that the audience is going to dictate the topics that are in each letter. And then these topics or these issues are not going to be discussed exhaustively. Meaning they're not going to be discussed as much as they possibly could. So issues not discussed exhaustively. And Paul will sometimes say like, okay, he's going to describe an issue, maybe something to do with communion and the practice of communion. And then at the end of a passage, he'll say, the rest I'll tell you when I get to you. And so he's not including all of the information about a specific doctrine in the letter, because he's going to go and actually visit that church specifically to give them more specific instruction in person. So the audience, though, will dictate which issues Paul wants to discuss. If there's sexual immorality in a church, then Paul's going to write about sexual immorality. If there's a group of Jews who's trying to make sure Gentiles are all circumcised, he's going to write about circumcision and talk about that. If there's people in the church who are preaching false doctrine, he's going to write specifically addressing either those people or how the church deals with those people. Okay, and he's going to discuss the issues that the church is dealing with, and he's going to discuss them only as much as needed. This is not a systematic theology. This is not. These letters are not a place to describe the robust, exhaustive theology. This is just to deal with specific issues. Sometimes he's just putting out quick fires. And then the last thing to think of is that Paul is an Eastern thinker. Okay, and what is an Eastern thinker? Well, let's contrast it to a Western thinker. Western thinkers are going to view literature as being linear. Okay, so maybe you have the the buildup of a story, then you have the climax, and then you have kind of its downfall. And in here is a bunch of problems or reasons, and the conclusion is here, maybe like a movie, or a Western thinker is going to view things um, as needing to be symmetrical or discussed in a very linear, logical fashion. Okay, so A equals B equals C, or like A plus B equals C. Well, this is not how Eastern thinkers write or how they think. They're going to do more circular thinking. Okay, and so they're going to have an issue. Let's say it's love, and they're gonna describe it, and then they're gonna describe it again, and then they're gonna describe it again. And they're describe it in a different way, and then look at a different way of describing it, and it kind of is like each chapter is like a flower petal that's kind of pointing to the center topic. This is how an Eastern thinker thinks. It goes in circles, and you guys should be used to this in some way because your teacher is not often very linear. Okay, I will describe one thing in one way, and then I'll describe another thing in another way, and it gets very confusing because we like things to be organized in our Western perspectives, but these letters aren't going to be organized in the way that we want them to, or the way that we're used to having our Western books and literature and movies organized, but they're going to be organized a little differently, a little less structured. Okay. Just because they're less structured doesn't mean that things aren't intentional. Okay. Paul's going to be very intentional. He's a genius when he's writing. But he doesn't seem like a genius maybe because it doesn't relate to how we read and how we write.